Joining us for the webinar edition of the 2019 through 2021 Boulder County Trends Report, presented by Community Foundation Boulder County. I'm Chris Barge, Vice President of Strategic Initiatives, and I edit the Trends Report, which is brought to you by more than 20 people who've worked for over 9 months to look at all of the community indicators. We analyze over 150 of them, figure out what's new and persistent in Boulder County, talk to experts about these trends, and then we go and we report and we talk with your neighbors in Boulder County who are living at the center of each of the issues that we are bringing to light in the magazine. You can get copies of the Trends Report by calling the Community Foundation or just coming down to our offices in Boulder. And you can explore all 150 indicators and discussions of each, as well as find all the content available in the magazine at our website. You can just Google Boulder County Trends or go to comfound.org/trends. Trends is brought to you by the Community Foundation. Since 1991, we have been a community catalyst, responding to immediate needs and anticipating future challenges. Through informed decision-making, we inspire ideas, ignite action, and mobilize diverse resources to improve the quality of life here in Boulder County. We rely on Trends for our own work, and we publish it as a community resource for you. Trends is possible thanks to the generous support of our sponsors. That includes the Knight Foundation, Boulder County Government, Boulder Community Health, the Boulder Chamber, Google, and Plant Moran. And the Community Foundation, Boulder County's many generous donors also provide the support that makes this possible. The Trends Report is divided into 7 chapters. It begins with a discussion of what's new and persistent on the demographics front. And so, who are we? Well, anymore with the high cost of housing, who we are is driven by who can afford to live here. This is a photograph of Nikki and Noah Larson. The couple lived in Boulder, the city of Boulder, for over a decade, and they really considered themselves model citizens. They voted in every election, they stumped for campaigned for candidates, they helped out with the restoration efforts after the 2010 4 Mile Fire. But when it came time to stop renting and to start looking for a place to settle down and purchase a home, they looked and looked, but kept being unable to find a place in Boulder. They wound up finding a home in Wheat Ridge, where they're pictured here. And so, like a lot of people in Boulder County who rent, they were not able to find a home they could afford. This is a picture of Malik Salisbury. He moved here from Tennessee and works with with Boulder Food Rescue. And he lives at one of our co-ops in Boulder. He says this barely helps him afford to live here, but he too wonders whether this is a place where he can call home for very long. When you look at who we are mostly not from Colorado. 55% of us came from another U.S. state. One of the biggest trends is that we're participating in the first world trend of getting older. Compared to 100 years ago, the human race in the first world is living 65% longer than we used to. And so the yellow line here shows the fact that we are going to move from 50,000 Boulder County residents that are 65 and older to nearly 100,000 residents in the senior bracket over the next 25 years. So what we have here to accommodate our older population, as well as our attitudes towards seniors, is going to be more and more important. As a county, we're becoming more diverse. This is a photograph of J.L. Mayers. He brought our photographer to the tracks that divide East and West Longmont to make a point. His family's been in Longmont for about 5 generations, but until only very recently, it was known that the Latino population was welcome to live on the east side of the tracks, but not on the west side. The Latino demographic is our future, as you can see in this chart, where you look at the age distribution of the Latino population. which is mostly younger, compared to the age distribution of the non-Hispanic white population, which is mostly older. When we look out across our 13 cities and towns in Boulder County, we can see that the population booms are really in Erie, Lafayette, and Louisville, which has experienced double-digit growth over the last 5 years. Particularly Erie, which when you include the Weld County side of their population is at 24,000 people and has grown 18%. That's really where families are affording a foothold into the easternmost corner of Boulder County. When we look at education, FullDay Kindergarten really stuck out, as did the fact that we're making progress when it comes to the vast education disparities between kids from low-income families and their peers, as well as students who are in the minority populations as far as race and ethnicity. However, we still have a long way to go. Overall, we know we're highly educated. In Boulder County, we are twice as likely as adults to hold bachelor's degree or higher as compared to the national average. We have a cover story about a standout student named Emily Sanchez pictured here. I encourage you to go online or pick up a copy of our magazine, read about her. She graduated at 17 from Longmont High School. She's the daughter of a mother who immigrated here from Mexico and a father who's an educator of Apache descent. And she has a really interesting social analysis that's important about how necessary it is to really focus on representation and access when it comes to education. As I mentioned, FullDay Kindergarten, free FullDay K, finally arrived in Colorado and began its full implementation in the fall of 2019. This is a picture of Jared Polis being congratulated by Gina Nocera, who used to run his foundation before he became governor. And this is a big deal, particularly for the students in Boulder Valley, about a third of whom have been enrolled in FullDay Kindergarten, but now it'll be 100%. In St. Vrain, they have had FullDay Kindergarten on a sliding scale for 10 years. They've been very visionary in that regard. And now, of course, it'll be free to everyone, not on a sliding scale. We continue to worry that we have a large achievement gap, one of the largest in the state. When you look at this is a chart showing the reading proficiency and the difference in the students from low-income backgrounds compared to their peers. You can see that the kids on free and reduced lunch, whether they be in either of our county school districts or comparing that to how the students do on free and reduced lunch across the state, there is no difference. And so the question comes back to us here in one of the wealthiest corners of the state with families from some of the highest educational backgrounds. Why can't we do better than the state average for the kids who depend on school the most? We know that higher education is not pursued equally by all. This chart shows that kids who come from Latino families and families that qualify for free and reduced lunch are far less likely to pursue higher education than their peers. And this is a photo of Anise Medrano. She has an excellent TED Talk about the external influences that really she credits for her success. She's enrolled at CU Boulder now. But she says she strives for a day when we have a truly an equitable education system where kids, all kids, no matter their background, are so supported fully that they don't need to depend on external influences for their success, that it's baked right into the system. With our health and human services, the headlines for this trends report are that our insurance coverage has tapered down a bit and mental health issues as well as vaping loom large. So this chart shows Boulder County's experience with Medicaid and CHIP Plus, the two key public health supports. And you can see that 2 years ago in 2017, we really peaked as far as our enrollment, and it was really on a tear. It was a very positive thing after the passage of the Affordable Care Act and then the start of healthcare coverage expansions here in Colorado with the Medicaid expansion being accepted. And then the heroic efforts inside Boulder County government to enroll as many people as possible meant that we had more than doubled in a very short period of time the number of people enrolled here in Boulder County on those key health supports. We can see over the last 2 years, that's fallen off a bit. So we'll continue tracking this. A couple vectors pressing against this are all of the discussion at a national level about potential for a public charge rule has caused a lot of fear and a drop back of enrollment among populations who feel targeted by threats that they're pursuing benefits might risk their opportunity for a green card or U.S. citizenship. Also, with a booming economy, we have more and more of our local residents enrolled in employee-sponsored health plans, so that's a good thing. We know that vaping is a big deal across the country. It's a big deal here locally when almost half of Boulder Valley High School students have tried vaping. You know, this is really changing what we used to be able to take for granted just one generation ago, that smoking was understood to be bad for you. There weren't as many high school kids smoking, and now that it's taken this different form, we're having to address that question again and say, you know, is this something that's acceptable? Is this okay? We know we have low vaccination rates across the county for children. This chart shows where we're at. You really need to have vaccination rates in the 93% or higher range in order to have what health professionals call herd immunity. And so this does put us at risk if there were to be a measles outbreak, as has been the case in a couple other parts of the country recently. So this is something that we should worry about. And from a public health perspective, it's important that everybody get vaccinated. We've noticed in the last couple of years a renewed focus on mental health, and that's taken a lot of forms. Boulder County voters last year approved new facilities to open at the jail. Those are currently under construction, and a lot of that is pointing upstream and recognizing the fact that whereas in the past it was a handful of inmates on any given day that were presenting with mental health problems. Now our local sheriff says that on some days, more than half of the jail population is struggling with mental health issues. And there's also been a renewed focus at Boulder Community Health that opened the Della Cava Family Pavilion, which has a whole floor dedicated to inpatient mental health. When we talk about mental health, the areas of focus that we hear the most about include opioids, which has been an epidemic that has seen some positive trending downwards, focusing on suicide prevention, LGBTQ issues, and teen mental health. With economy and housing, this may be the most consequential chart in our trends report. You see that over the last 15 years, the value of local home prices has doubled. Not just in Boulder, where it's the most expensive and has skyrocketed from around $500,000 to almost $1 million as a median home price, but also in our most affordable town, Longmont continues to be the most affordable, but instead of having entry-level homes in the low 200s, your entry-level homes are now in the mid 400s. And so it really is putting pressure on families everywhere who want to move from rents that are getting to be more and more expensive to home ownership. They're having to look farther east even than the Boulder County line. And so what does that say is we know we're becoming more diverse about the pressure that that this diverse population that we often say that we want is going to experience in trying to stay here. We know that we've been fortunate on the one hand. We've added more than 40,000 jobs, or almost 40,000 jobs in the decade between 2007 and 2017. But we also know that we've experienced a lot more traffic on the Diagonal Highway, Arapahoe, Baseline, South Boulder Road. And all of that is because for every 3.5 jobs that have been added, we've only added 1 housing unit. And so this has implications for our environment with all the pollution that comes from more traffic. And also, of course, this question of demographics and who we want to be able to live here in Boulder County. We know the childcare costs, rival housing. This infographic shows just how expensive it is, almost $27,000 to have a couple of kids in childcare and preschool in Boulder County. And that's very high compared to even elsewhere around the state. For example, in Pueblo, your bill would be $15,000. We know that Latino families struggle more here financially than elsewhere. Just look at the chart on the bottom where an Anglo family, a white non-Hispanic family, really makes up for the high cost of living with a higher salary. And that's not the case with Latino families who on average make less in Boulder County than they do nationally. And of course, they need to be going in the other direction. So as a percent of white non-Hispanic Anglo income, they're making much less here in Boulder County than nationally. And you can see that a recent analysis showed that while the poverty level for a family of four is about $26,000, what you really need in Boulder County is closer to $86,000. This series of charts shows the huge gender pay gap that we have in Boulder County. It's a really big deal. This is a picture of a employee field day for JVA and Associates. They're an engineering firm in Boulder that has made good progress. For the first time last year, the women on their payroll actually were a little bit ahead of the men. But you can see in this chart just the vast disparity between women, whether they're high school dropouts making $24,000 compared to the men who dropped out of high school that make $31,000, or on the top end of the scale, if they have a graduate or professional degree, the women here are making less than the national average at $56,000, while the men are making more than the national average at $96,000. There's a story in our trends report about profiling an idea that Julie Van Domelen at EFA has. That's Boulder's Emergency Family Assistance Association. She makes the point that family poverty actually could be solved for about $5 million annually. And when you look at the size of the city's budget and what their priorities are as expressed by their budget, they've got more than that spent annually on the municipalization effort. And so she argues that it's actually not a far out idea. It's the logical thing to do. With our environment, we have substantial problems, but also hope and action. On the air pollution front, we still have a lot of people commuting solo to work. 65% of our residents drive alone, and that compares to about 75% nationally. So as a county with a pro-environment reputation, we ironically have really taken a step backwards with our land use planning since the 60s by not building, but preserving a green belt around our cities and in between our towns, and by having a robust economy in the city of Boulder that has 2 jobs for every adult. The result is a lot of traffic. The Census traffic pattern analysis shows that 4 out of 5 Boulder County residents have jobs in Boulder County, but they are mostly living in the east part of the county and commuting in and out of Boulder. Also, oil and gas extraction, commercial buildings contribute to the chronic ozone problem that we know we have up and down the whole Front Range, which suffers from an inversion weather pattern as the airstream is divided by the Rocky Mountains and flushes into the bowl that is the Denver area. Efforts in the city of Boulder are worth noting. They're really focusing in 3 areas: restoring and preserving the trees, bees, and soil. This is a picture of Marcus McCauley speaking of preserving soil or restoring the land. He lives next to a parcel of City of Boulder owned open space up near Longmont, and the land had not been farmed in a long time, had gone fallow, and so much of the topsoil had blown up against his fence that his sheep were able to walk over it. And so he's working with the city on this. They're focusing on pollinators, and they're also focusing on the urban tree canopy as they try to catch up and respond to the emerald ash borer, which has decimated so much of the urban canopy. So whose land is this? We are fortunate to live in a county that has 2/3 of its acreage either owned or protected by public land agencies. It works out to about an acre for every Boulder County resident of publicly owned or protected land. And yet we know that not everyone in our community is using this land. And when we have emphasis on preservation and not access, and when we have a bias towards preventing big groups of people from using the land by not building big picnic shelters, for example, what we do is we segregate and we say that those who come from a culture that is more likely to wander out into the forest in twos and threes and fours is more welcome than, for example, a Latino family that has ideas about congregating with their whole family and would more readily access the public lands if there were more group congregational facilities. When we look at the environment further, we see that there's a couple of fights going on that really hold a mirror to our values as a community, which are a little bit split. There's a big fight going on right now trying to stop gross dams expansion. Denver Water wants to raise the dam. They're going to need to clear out a whole lot of trees if they're going to do it. But there's a lot of unified opposition in Boulder County to that plan. So on the one hand, it is a move to preserve and to keep construction traffic out of the backdrop of Boulder. The Gross Dam is behind the Flatirons. On the other hand, you have to ask, where is the Front Range going to get its water if we don't expand our reservoirs? Are we going to build a new reservoir? That would be more environmentally damaging. And what about the equity argument that would say that everybody on the Front Range deserves a right to access to fresh water? There's definitely two sides of that argument. The argument against any expansion or building of any dam would be that we need to just change our water consumption practices. The chart in the middle of this page here shows what our consumption practices are. We on average consume about 81 gallons per day, and that's on the low end of the national average of 80 to 100. And that's where we ought to be as a water-constrained state. But it certainly doesn't put us so far head and shoulders above the rest of the country to where we can really say that we no longer need to be thinking about the provision of water for the whole Front Range. Also, the energy supply. There's a whole debate about municipalization, a lot of money being spent on the city trying to create its own municipal utility. And then at the same time, this shows the progress that Excel has made towards a portfolio of more renewable energy. We cover our arts and culture, and one thing that you just can't miss when you start looking into it is how so many organizations, including the SCFD, are working to try to be more inclusive of more cultures and communities. We live in a very rich area when it comes to the arts. A study in recent years by the National Endowment for the Arts showed that, in fact, Boulder is an arts cluster, and there are more per capita artists in the city of Boulder and surrounding areas than any place in the country outside of Santa Fe or Los Angeles. We are also noticing that this robust artist and artistic community has peaked as far as its full-time and part-time employment. When part-time and full-time employment for the arts and artists go down, then contract gigs go up. There is a trend towards enhancing the arts by welcoming all. This is an example by Modus Theater of a new project they call the Undocu Monologues. And Jorge Ramos, a news host from Univision, here is shown reading the monologue of someone who has immigrated here and is local. If you go to shoeboxstories.org, you can read all about and hear these Undocu Monologues. Finally, our last chapter focuses on our civic participation and giving. And we know we have much work yet to do in achieving connected and inclusive communities. This is a photo taken by the Daily Camera who is a great partner with us by providing lots of file footage for our magazine. This is a photo of Zaid Atkinson addressing the City Council in March of 2019 after he was confronted by a Boulder police officer who wound up resigning after the confrontation turned into a multi-officer response. And Zaid was just outside of his own apartment, owned by the city, by Naropa University, picking up trash. And he feels he was profiled. And this really shines a light on the fact that despite the fact that we feel that we are a progressive community, there are facts on the ground that beg to differ, including the Community Foundation's very own survey about openness and connectedness. We asked a representative swath of Boulder County residents, when they think about their community, who are we most open to and least open to? And consistently, this rank order has not changed over the years. Our community feels that, our residents feel that our community is most open to gay and lesbian people and least open to racial and ethnic minorities and immigrants from other countries. One way that we can become a more connected community is to really pay attention when the census rolls around every 10 years. On April 1st of 2020, the census will once again come to our town in an attempt to account for every one of us. And there's a lot at stake here. The amount of federal funding that stands to come to every Colorado resident counted is $2,300 a year. Multiply that by 10 years until the next census, and there's $23,000 per person on the line. So we have a lot of work to do, and there's also a perfect storm stacking up against the odds of success. It's the first time that this has been a primarily internet-driven effort. Also, the census from the federal level continues to be funded less and less, and this has been going on for a decade. And so experts are warning that there's a lot of risk, and but local efforts hopefully are filling in the gap. It also didn't help earlier this year that there was a push to put a citizenship question on the ballot, and that may have caused damage that will last through this census in the effort to get everyone to raise their hand and say that they belong here and they are being counted. Another thing we track with civic participation and giving is the fact that here in Boulder County, we're not very philanthropic. In fact, we're in the bottom quartile for giving in the state of Colorado. Our giving ratio, as measured by a study by the Chronicle on Philanthropy, is right at about 2.5% of our gross income, and that is far lower than the national average. In fact, if we would all give at the national average, it would mean 68 million more given to charity. Right now, our contributions total $292 million out of Boulder County each year, and that is a lot in hard dollars. It puts us in the top 5% of counties, but we're also higher than the top 5% of counties as far as a concentration of wealth. And so if we were doing our part, we would be giving an additional $68 million. This would mean a lot to local organizations like Community Food Share, pictured here, when we talked with their organization about what they'd do with an extra $1 million. Boy, it would mean a whole lot. It would mean fewer families went hungry, and it would mean that other organizations would be able to feed clients and take that most basic of human needs off the list, or make it less of a burning concern so that they could address more upstream issues. So that's our trends report. Thank you for listening. Really the theme that bubbled up for us as we edited and reported all of these stories is that the call to action is to discover, connect, engage, that together we can find our way. And that really what it takes is for us to have an awareness beyond just our family and our social friend networks, but to make every effort we can to find ways to meet those of us living in our community who may have different backgrounds and experiences than our own. Thank you for your time. We encourage you to explore all that our website has to offer at confound.org/trends. Thank you and have a nice day.